Hello, everyone. I am Laura Nelkin. I am thrilled to introduce the first design for 2022's N Club. The first design is a shawl called Atween that I am wearing. Atween is a modular 2-color shawl. It has a smattering of 4mm square Japanese seed beads on it. One of the things that I do in Atween that I think is really interesting is I've taken some techniques I've learned from traditional Shetland shawl construction, and I've applied them to a really kind of modern graphic shawl. So instead of applying them to a lace shawl, I am using them in a whole new way, and I think you're going to learn a lot from those techniques. I bet you're wondering what Atween means. And Atween means between in Shetland. So one of the things that I do in this modular shawl is join pieces together with a graft that you might not have worked before. So it's kind of like the between of those two pieces. So that's how I came up with the idea for the name Atween. I am really excited to jump into this whole shawl with you. So I think the first thing to do before I teach any technique is to go over the materials that you'll need for knitting a tween. If you got a kit for the N Club, then you'll have everything that you need handy right there, but I want to tell you about it. And if you're thinking about knitting a tween with another yarn, you'll need this section as well. So let's go ahead and jump right in with that first. So let's talk about materials for a tween. The first thing to talk about is always the most fun, right? That's the yarn that I used for a tween. I used 2 different colors of CC's Wool Superwash Merino fingering. And when I originally saw this yarn, it was a few years ago at a fiber festival. And Cecilia from CC's Wool sells this yarn in different put-up sizes, but she sells it in these like huge 800, I believe, let me see what it is. So if this is 550 yards, I think the skeins that I saw were like 1,100 yards or something like that in one skein. And I was always like, well, that would make one amazing shawl. So when I started to talk with her and her dyer, Kelly, about working with me for the N Club this year, At first, I was just going to go with the single skein and do one piece and not have a 2-color project. And then I was like, hey, is there any way we can dye 2 different colors that contrast from each other but play together really well? And they agreed to being able to do that. So there are 2 different colors. Your 2 skeins are exactly the same amount of yarn. Both have 550 yards on the skein. This is 100% superwash merino wool. I believe it is milled in the US. I don't believe that the merino is from the US. And it is lovely to work with. It is a light fingering weight, trending towards lace weight yarn, but it's almost my favorite weight of yarn. I love working with light fingering weight yarn, and it's not as easy to find as lace weight and fingering weight yarn. So I'm thrilled to share this base with you, and I have a feeling that a lot of you haven't worked with it before. When we talk about color, the 2 colors that I chose contrast with each other, and that contrast is pretty important so that the colors as they play together in a tween contrast from each other. I went for one color, the color 1 that I use in the pattern, which is this deep purple. And as you look at the skeins, everybody's are just a little bit different. There are so many different colors going on in here, and it's so fun. So one of the colors is a bit more variegated, and then the pink color, the sumac color, sumac bobs, is a little bit more solid. And that's just to create some more dimensionality between the stitches. If they were both variegated or they were both solid, I think that things wouldn't flow as beautifully as they do with having this contrast in color in them as well. Doing color development with Kelly was an absolute blast for this project. We had a great time together. So these 2 skeins of yarn, that's the first thing that you're going to need. The next thing that you need for knitting a tween are beads. And I used, as I said, square beads, which I don't believe I've ever used in an End Club project before. These square beads are 4mm beads. They are Japanese seed beads, and they have the coolest, like purpley rainbow matte finish on them that I absolutely love. I just needed to spill them out so you could really see them. Also in your kit, you got a piece of super floss because we'll be placing beads on this project. You could also use a 0.8mm to 1mm crochet hook if you have one, or if you have a beetle needle, you can use that as well. And then one of the other things that comes in your pattern are these really awesome cords that you can use to hold stitches on. So these cords can be really helpful if you are knitting a sweater and you want to put all of your stitches onto a holder so you can try on your sweater. But in a tween, there are multiple places where as you're building up the traps and then setting them aside, you need to put your stitches onto something. And I'm going to show you right now how great these are to work with. So let me just zhuzh the beads out of the way. That's a technical term, that zhuzhing word. I have a swatch right here that is ready to go onto a cord. And you have a few different lengths of cord that I gave you guys in your kit for playing around with. All of them will be a fine length to use for a tween. But what you can do with these cords is they have a hollow middle to them and they're silicone. So you can just take it and stick it onto your needle that you want to transfer your stitches onto the cord. And then you can just slide your stitches down onto the cord and ta-da, your stitches are held on a cord. Isn't that easy? I really, really love doing this. So the other thing you could do is if you have your stitches on a cord and the pattern says, put your stitches back onto a needle, just take your needle again, put it into the end on the cord like that, and then you can go ahead and it's a little harder on the silicone. There's a little more friction, a little more grab. You can go ahead and just slide your stitches back onto your needle. So I think now that you have these cords, and I tried to give you a bunch of cord in your kit, you're going to be able to play with them in a multitude of ways, not just on a tween. Definitely let me know if you have any questions about how to work with those. I think they're incredibly easy to use. The trick is to just make sure you've really jammed it onto your needle before you go to pull it so it doesn't come off midway. I did have that happen once when I hadn't jammed it successfully all the way, if you will. So those are your stitch holders. The other thing that you're going to need for your pattern are 2 different sizes of needles. So you'll see as you look at the materials list in your pattern that there's needle A, B, C, D, and E. Those are actually only 2 sizes of needles. There's just different places in the pattern where you're using the size, US size 5, and then there's some places in the pattern that you use this US size 6. What you want to do is make sure that you get gauge with needle A. So whichever, I believe it's needle A, needle C. I'm looking at my notes to make sure I got it right. So needle A and needle C are a US size 5, but you want to try to get gauge with a US size 5. And the gauge in the pattern is 20 stitches over 40 rows in over 4 inches, 20 stitches by 40 rows equals 4 inches in garter stitch unblocked. Since we're all using the same yarn, you don't need to block your swatch. So what I suggest doing is grabbing a needle and casting on about 25 or 30 stitches. If you know, so if you've knit a fair number of my patterns and you know you knit pretty much right on target with my designs, go ahead and grab a US size 5. If you know that you knit quite loosely, maybe go down a needle. So start with a US size 4. And if you know that you're a tight knitter, then start with a needle size up, like a US size 6. Cast on those 25 stitches, knit a good number of rows. Maybe you don't need to knit 40 rows, but like 25 or 30 rows, and then lay that swatch down without blocking it and measure it and see how many stitches and how many rows you have over 4 inches. And then that's your gauge. From that gauge, you might need to go up or down a needle size. And remember that needle A is the needle that you're using to get gauge. Definitely ask any questions about gauge. If you haven't worked gauge a lot before and you're wondering if you're doing things right, I'm happy to support you in doing that. The reason that we do gauge with a shawl is that you don't want to run out of yarn, and you also don't want to end up with a fabric that is either too stiff or too loose. So I think it's important to do gauge swatches even when you're knitting just like a shawl or a cowl. I feel pretty strongly about them, and a few of you probably know that by now. So that's everything that you need for the pattern. And now that we've talked about materials and we've talked about gauge, the next thing, which is a very fun conversation, is to talk about the construction of a tween. Okay, let's talk about how I knit a tween, like how this modular construction came to be. I have to say that a tween probably could have been a mystery knit along because it has all of these different elements that come together in unexpected ways. And as I designed it, as I got kind of halfway through it, I was like, oh, this totally could have been a mystery knit along. And what I love about it for you all is that you can really knit it in sections, and I think it's really goal-oriented knitting, which you all know that is one of my favorite things to do. I don't love to just cast on for a scarf and then knit like the world's longest rectangle. I like to have designs that kind of like keep me interested and keep moving. So the bulk of a tween is 3 different trapezoids that are knit separately. I call them trap 1, trap 2, and trap 3. And those 3 trapezoids, as they are connected together, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I get them right. Those trapezoids are connected with extensions. So let's look down at this drawing right here, and I'll kind of move it around so that you can see the whole shawl. And you can see the 3 different trapezoids right there. And then you can see the 2 extensions that come together. So the first thing that you do when you go to knit a tween is you do a provisional cast on right down here at the bottom of trap 1, and you begin to work a trapezoid that is increased with yarn overs at the edge of the trapezoid, and I'll be teaching you how to do those yarn overs at the end of a row. It's a fun technique that's used in Shetland shawls often. So you'll be working trap 1 up till you get to the end of trap 1, and then you'll be putting those stitches on a holder. The next thing you'll do when you're done with that is you will pick up stitches along the yarn over edge of trap 1, and you will work out in an extension until you get to the center right here. And then you will put those stitches on a holder. Then you'll go to work trap 2. What I should have said is trap 1 is knit with color 1. That is all in the pattern. You'll certainly be following the pattern as you're doing this. Trap 2, which is worked with color 2, you'll be doing a provisional cast on right here. You'll be working trap 2 exactly the same as you did for trap 1 until you get to the end, and you'll be putting those stitches on a holder. And then you'll be picking up along the yarn over edge right here and working an extension towards the center. That extension is this color, this 2-color area right here that has this really beautiful plaid stitch to it that has beads on it. When you get to the center right there, you will be grafting this extension and this extension together with the graft that I learned that is used in Shetland for huge square lace shawls. It's a super cool graft, and I'm really excited to show you guys how to do that. So once you do that, you have knit all the way through here of your shawl, and then you're gonna pick up the yarn over stitches on the other side of your trap 1, and you're gonna work in this direction, working an extension off the other side of trap 2. Then you will set that aside, put those stitches on a stitch holder. You will provisionally cast on for trap 3, work trap 3 in color 1 as you did for trap 1, and then put those stitches on a holder, pick up stitches over the yarn over edge, and then work in this direction and graft again. So you have two of those really fun grafts that happen in the middle of both of those extensions. Then you're going to go along the top of your shawl and put these stitches back onto a needle, pick up stitches along this edge, unzip that provisional cast on and put your stitches on your needle, pick up stitches, place those stitches back on your needle, and then knit back across again, and then work an I-cord edging all along the top of your shawl, and then the top of your shawl is completed. Oh, my voice is getting a little hoarse here. And then you are going to pick up and knit stitches all the way down this yarn over edge. You're going to unzip these provisional cast on stitches. You'll pick up stitches here. You will replace all of those stitches from trap 2 onto your needle. You will pick up stitches. You'll unzip this provisional cast on, and then you'll pick up stitches along this yarn over edge over here. Sorry, let's make sure you see that. And then you will work a lace border down on the bottom of your shawl. And when you bind off that lace border, you are done with your Atween. So as you can see from this, it's very goal-oriented knitting. You can say to yourself, this week I'm gonna knit trap 1 and do that first extension. Next week I'm gonna work on trap 2 and do that extension and join them together, and on like that. So I think within 3 or 4 weeks, while you're still working on other projects, you will also have your Atween done. And I'm happy to kind of work with you all on a little schedule if that would help you kind of stay on track to get your Atween done before the next End Club project comes out. So in a nutshell, that is the construction of Atween. And what I'd like to do now is, instead of showing you on my needles everything that's happening in the pattern, because I know that some of you have different familiarity with my patterns and have different needs for knowing what parts of a video you want to watch, I'm going to do a technique section where I teach you about placing beads on stitches and the way they're used in Atween, in case you haven't done that before. And then I'm going to do a technique section on picking up stitches, because I know that's something that people really enjoy to see close up and personal. And then I'll teach you some things about doing provisional cast on and working the traps and looking at the chart. So let's jump right in with placing beads first. Okay, let's talk about beads in Atween. I love just getting to this right away because you know I love beads, and I know many of you do as well. So as I said earlier, I used 4mm square Miyuki Japanese seed beads in Atween. There are about 10 beads to the gram, and I gave you about 30 grams of those beads in your kit, so you should have plenty left over. If you don't have access to 4mm beads and you want to use a different bead, you could also use size 6 Japanese seed beads. Those will fit on this yarn perfectly as well. Those will be round instead of square. And there's about 12 or 14 beads to the gram for size 6 beads. So if you don't want to work with beads in Atween, that is also absolutely fine. All you need to do is just ignore the instructions for placing beads and work the stitches as they're written, and that is a fine choice. You just ignore where it says PB in your pattern. So the two places that Atween has beads, I want to show you on this swatch right here. I have like a little mini version of an extension on my needles. So you can see right here that the beads only go on the sumac bobs color. So if you choose to switch your colors and use the sumac bobs or the pink color for color 1, and then the lupin color for color 2, you might find that your beads don't contrast enough with your yarn. I designed it so that the beads are always going to be on color 2, and they really pop beautifully against that beautiful fuchsia of the sumac bobs. So the first place the beads are used in this is in this fun plaid stitch. This is a slip stitch that is very easy there are rows that have garter stitch and rows that are kind of stockinette stitch. And so the plaid really pops, and you can see that the beads are sitting on alternating slip stitches in that section. And then the next place that there's a bead is after you work a center double decrease or a CDD, then you're placing a bead on a stitch. So those are the two places that beads are used in this pattern. Super easy to do. So let me go ahead and show you how to do that. I have a swatch right here on my needles that is ready to work row, I believe it is 3 of the pattern, just so I could show you how that slip stitch pattern was worked. I'm going to move that yarn over. I was doing something very odd. I want to show you how the slip stitch pattern is worked on row 3, and then row 4 has the beads placed on it. So I'm just going to kind of get myself together. I'm going to show you how to place the beads with a crochet hook. So I'm working row 3, which is with color 1, and the pattern says to knit 5. And then slip a stitch purlwise with yarn and back, and then knit 5. And then slip a stitch with yarn and back, and then knit 5 to the end of the row. And that is row 3. Obviously, you're gonna have more stitches on your needles than I have on mine right now. Now on row 4, I am also knitting because this is a garter stitch row, and I am going to knit 5, and then I am going to place a bead and slip one purlwise with yarn in front. So I bring my yarn to the front of my work, and then with a crochet hook, I'm going to go grab a bead, and then I'm going to slip the next stitch off of my left hand needle, put that bead onto the stitch by pulling up a little bit, and then I am going to go ahead and slip that stitch onto the right hand needle without twisting it. And now I'm going to bring my yarn to the back of my work, and I'm going to go ahead and knit to the next stitch. You'll be placing beads on alternating stitches, but I want to show you how to place that bead one more time. I also want you to know that if you are going to place a bead with your super floss, I do have a second video to teach you how to do that, and I'll make sure to link to that below if you want to use your super floss. So I'm going to bring my yarn to the front. I'm going to go ahead and grab a bead. I'm going to pull up that stitch tight so I've got lots of tension. Slide that bead down onto the yarn, and then slip that stitch over to the right hand needle. And then I am going to go ahead and knit to the end of the row. And that is how easy it is to work with the beads in that slip stitch plaid stitch as part of the extension. Now the next place that you place beads on a tween is on the center double decrease as you're just finishing up your extension. So I'm just looking over at my pattern to make sure that I am showing this to you correctly. And I am going to go grab the swatch that I have all ready to go to show you how to do this. So this is happening on row 1, where your pattern says you will continue working with color 2 only for these last 4 rows. So I am at that point in the pattern, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to knit 2, and I'm going to slip, slip, knit, and then I'm going to yarn over, and now I'm going to center double decrease with a bead. So I'm going to slip 2 stitches together knitwise. I'm going to knit 1. I'm going to pass those 2 slip stitches over, and then onto this stitch right here, I am going to place a bead. So I'm going to grab my crochet hook, and then I am going to go to that stitch and just slide a bead down onto that stitch and put that stitch onto my right hand needle. And now I'm going to make a yarn over, and I'm going to knit 3. And now I'm going to do a yarn over and a center double decrease again, so you get to see this one more time. And now I'm gonna place a bead onto that stitch. I'm gonna be crazy here, and I'm just gonna pinch underneath that stitch so it can't go anywhere. Grab my bead, put the bead on, and then get that stitch onto my needle. So that's even a little faster if you're comfortable with the pinch technique. I use that pinch technique a lot when I want to play with the stitch quickly and not have it slip out. And now I am just looking over at my pattern so I don't make sense. Now I'm going to knit two together right here and then knit those last two stitches. And now you're just going to finish on, but those are the techniques that you need to know for placing beads in a tween. Again, let me know if you have questions. I'm happy to help you. Okay, let's work on picking up stitches together. There are two places in a tween that you'll be picking up stitches, and the techniques are a little bit different. The first place is along the yarn over edge of your traps. And this might be a different pickup than you've done before, and I'm happy to be showing it to you. So what you're going to do, I'm going to read straight from the pattern to make sure that we're all clear, is with the right side facing of your trap, and you can see that I mark the right side with a removable stitch marker because the traps are reversible and it's pretty hard to tell which is the right side and which is the wrong side. I'm going to use needle A, and starting from the provisional cast on edge, I'm going to pick up but not knit 59 stitches along the right yarn over edge right here. This is approximately 1 stitch in every 7 stitches and then 2 stitches in the 8th stitch. But there's totally a zhuzh factor here. You just want to make sure that you've picked up but not knit 59 stitches along your edge. Obviously, my trap that I'm working with right now is a little bit smaller than yours, so I'm not going to be picking up 59 stitches, but the technique is the same. So I'm starting down at the provisional cast on. I've got my right side facing, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pick up the leg of the yarn over facing you from the front to the back. So that might be different than you've done before. I'm going into that stitch from the front to the back, and then I'm going to go into the next yarn over from the front to the back. So I've got the left leg of the yarn over to the front of the needle and the right leg to the back. And now I'm going to go in and I'm going to pick up 7 stitches like that. I've got 5, I've got 6, I've got 7. And now on this 8th stitch, I need to pick up 2 stitches. So I'm going to pick up both legs of the yarn over, both the one closer to me and the one farther away from me from the front to the back. And now I'm going to continue on for 7 more stitches. And I'll do that double one more time. So I'm going to pick up the first one, and then I'm going to go in and I'm going to pick up the second one from the front to the back, and then continue along like that until you've got 59 stitches. Notice that I picked those up, but I did not knit them. So now I've got them on my needle. I'm going to turn my work so my wrong side is facing. And then with your yarn that is still attached, you're going to grab the other end of your needle, and then you are going to knit that stitch into the front of it, twisting it, and you are going to be twisting that on purpose. What you're doing here is creating this really cool kind of decorative edge along that yarn over edge. If you wanted to have a yarn over hole here instead of a twist, you could be working through that back leg right there and not twisting the stitch. But I twisted the stitch on purpose because I really liked how it worked. So now you're just going to work back across that, twisting those stitches as you work back across, and then you are all set up with the correct number of stitches on your needles to work the extension as written. Okay, The next way that you're going to be picking up stitches in a tween is when you go to work the top border for that I-cord edging, for the attached I-cord edging, and then also along the bottom border when you go to pick up stitches to work the lace at the bottom border. So I just want to show you how easy it is to pick up those stitches. Basically, if you follow the rule of one stitch in every other row, you'll be picking up approximately the right number of stitches. So if I go ahead and I just look at this little swatch that I have of an extension on my needles, when you look at the garter ridges right here, if you pick up one stitch in each color, that actually counts as one stitch in every other row, because every ridge in a garter is 2 rows. So that's a really easy way to pick up along the garter edge. And then once we get into kind of that slip stitch plaid section, this right here is 2 rows. So I'll pick up 1 raspberry and 1 purple and 1 raspberry going across, which makes it really easy. So let me just go ahead and show you how to do that. I'm going to pick up a stitch in color 1 right there, and then I'm going to pick up a stitch in color 2, and then I'm going to pick up a stitch in color 3. Sorry, not color 3, color 1 again. Again, the groove there, and then I'm picking up a stitch in color 2, picking up a stitch in color 1, and I'm working across just like that. I'm picking up those stitches. Sometimes you have to kind of lift it up to get in there, from the front to the back. It definitely can be helpful when you do this if you have a needle with a sharp tip that can help you get in there well. Know that for both working this for the I-cord edge and for the lace border, when you come back and work on the wrong side row, you're knitting, which creates a garter bump, which covers up your pickup. So don't get too hung up in how your pickup looks, because that garter bump, when you come back to work on the wrong side row, is going to cover it up beautifully. And I do things like that on purpose so that we don't have to get too hung up in how things look and we can really enjoy our knitting. So that's what I have to teach you about picking up those stitches. And now that we have done that step, I want to jump into how to work the trapezoids, or the traps. Okay, let's get started and show you how to start working a trap and how to look at the chart. We're going to start right away with a provisional cast on for those of you who haven't worked a provisional cast on before. I am going to do this somewhat quickly, so if you're very new to provisional cast ons, I do have a 45-minute video on my YouTube channel that does like a deep dive into provisional cast-ons. So go ahead and watch that if you still have questions after watching this little demo. I've grabbed some scrap yarn that is smooth and a similar weight to my working yarn, and I have made a slip knot. I just have an extra trap here in case we need to look at that. I have made a slip knot, and I'm going to take that slip knot and I'm going to put it on to a crochet hook that is also a similar size to my working yarn. And then I'm going to grab my needle A, which is what I use to get gauge, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to provisionally cast on 7 stitches onto the needle. I think I'm going to work it this way. This is kind of my new favorite way to work provisional cast-ons lately. I'm going to take my yarn up and over my crochet hook, and I'm going to pull that through. And then I'm going to bring my yarn up and over and pull it through. And I'm going to do this so that I have 7 stitches on my needles. Sometimes your crochet hook can just slide right out. Go ahead and grab that and put it back on. Okay, 1, 2, 3. So there is 7 stitches. Great. And then what I like to do is just crochet cast on a few extra stitches so that I know which end to unzip from. And what this provisional cast on is going to do is give me live stitches to work with later. Now I forgot my scissors, so I'm going to do something bad. I'm a bad person. Don't do that at home. And now I am going to grab my working yarn, and the pattern says to knit 1 row. So I'm just going to go ahead and across those provisional stitches, I am going to knit 1 row. Just kind of make this look a little neater right here. And there I have 7 stitches in my working yarn. Now, if you're someone who gets worried about ripping out your provisional cast on, one thing you can do at this point is place a lifeline through all 7 of these stitches with your working yarn, and then that lifeline will hold all of your stitches so you could unzip that provisional cast on anytime that you want. So once you've got those 7 stitches on, it is time to start working from the chart. And I'm just gonna grab the chart to look at it with you. What you should know about this chart is there's also written instructions. So if you are somebody who does not love reading from a chart, you can certainly work from those written instructions instead, or jump back and forth to make sure that you're on target. The stitch that I use in the traps is a really lovely textured box stitch where I'm alternating boxes of garter stitch and slip stitch. It is quite easy to work, and I do have one trick that I'll show you about using markers to help you keep track of where you're working the squares so that you don't have to like constantly count every stitch. I found those markers really help me stay on track with the pattern. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna start with row 1, and you're gonna work row 1 from the right to the left. You always read from the number on the chart across. So I'm going to start right here, and that first stitch is a yarn over, and then I'm going to knit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which is exactly the number of stitches I have on my needle. And then I'm going to go to row 2, and I'm going to work a yarn over, and this is a knit on a wrong side row, and I'm going to knit to the end of the row. And I'm going to continue on like that, working odd number rows right to left and even number rows left to right. Remember, if you find that confusing, just go ahead and use the written instructions instead. So I have a feeling that for a lot of you, one of the things that's going to be new about this pattern is working a yarn over at the beginning of a row. So I want to show you how to do that. And it's a little bit different if you are working a yarn over at the beginning of a row, if you have a knit stitch as the next stitch or a purl stitch as the next stitch. So I'm going to start right here working with a knit stitch as the next stitch, and then I have a swatch on my needles to show you how to work that yarn over if a purl stitch is the next stitch. So I'm going to go in right here, and I'm just going to take my needle, come underneath my working yarn to make a yarn over on my right hand needle, and then I'm going to go in and knit the next stitch, and I've got a yarn over right over a knit next to a knit stitch, and now I'm just going to knit to the end of the row. Do you see how easy that was? And now I'm going to turn my work, and I'm on the wrong side row, and I'm going to make a yarn over, and again I'm knitting across all of these stitches. So I just bring that yarn over the needle and work across. Now I've got the same thing. I'm going to show it to you one more time on row 3, and then I'll show you what it's like if you have a purl stitch on the next stitch. So I'm turning my work, I get to row 3, I'm literally just putting my yarn over my needle and going ahead and knitting across. Okay, so that's how you do it with a knit stitch. Let's look at it with a purl stitch, which I have right here, ready to go. So I am on row 6 right here. One of the things I wanted to show you on this swatch is you can see on row 6, that I've delineated with stitch markers where the garter stitch box is. There are 9 stitches in between these stitch markers. I really think that it's going to help you a lot to place stitch markers to know where you're switching from the garter stitch boxes to the slip stitch boxes. And then the other thing I definitely suggest doing is marking the right side of your work with the removable stitch marker so that you know right side from wrong side. That also helped me a lot to keep track of where I was in the pattern. So now it's time to work a yarn over on the wrong side row. And what you want to do is bring your needle underneath your yarn and then bring your yarn around and bring it to the front so that you're wrapping it all the way around the needle. I'm going to go ahead and show that to you one more time. So I bring my needle underneath the yarn and then I bring the yarn to the front to work the purl stitch. And then I'm going to slip this marker, and these stitches are all knit, so I'm going to knit those. So I think that that yarn over piece is a very important piece of working the trapezoids. As you go to work the trapezoid, you'll be working rows 1 through 36 once, and then you repeat rows 19 to 36 4 times more. Every time you work them 1 time more, you'll be repeating the red box once more. Definitely let me know if you have any questions about that. Basically what's happening with the yarn overs is they're increasing out your trapezoid, creating that shape right at the edge of the trap. Okay, so now that we've looked at that, we get to do my favorite thing, which is that graft I've been telling you about. Okay, time for my absolute favorite graft. I think that this graft is why I designed this whole piece, and I'm thrilled to be sharing it with you. I have 2 like little mini extensions down on my needles, and I'm gonna get ready to show you how to put these both together. You certainly will have more stitches on your needles. The most important thing when you go to work this is to make sure that the wrong sides of your extensions are facing each other and that the right sides are out on both sides. So what you're gonna do is hold your needles together parallel to each other, and you're basically going to be knitting together the first stitch on the front needle with the first stitch on the back needle. This is a lot like doing a 3-needle bind off. The only difference is that you are not binding off any stitches, so the needle in your right hand is going to end up with 15 stitches on it. So I'm going into the first stitch on the front needle, first stitch on the back needle, and I'm just working across all the stitches on the needle. And we're almost done. There we go. So we've worked all the way across. I'm going to set those needles aside. I've got all 15 stitches onto my needle right here. And now what I'm going to do is take the end of my yarn and thread a tapestry needle onto the yarn. And then with that tapestry needle, I'm going to go through all of the stitches on my needle and slide them off onto the tapestry needle. When you're doing this, make sure not to split your yarn, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm pulling that tapestry needle through. When you go to pull it through, don't pull up too tightly. So kind of pull out like this and pull out, and you'll see that what you've done is create a graft that has yarn over holes going all the way across it. It'll look even more beautiful after you go to block it. So I absolutely love this graft because it is seamless. It integrates beautifully well into the rest of the yarn overs that are used in the pattern. And I'm really looking forward to using it in other designs in the future. It is time to work an attached I-cord edging. This might be familiar to some of you and it might not be familiar to others of you. So let's go ahead and do it together. I have the wrong side facing of one of my traps over here, just to show you how to work it across the top of the trap. The first thing that you want to do is provisionally cast on 3 stitches onto your empty needle. So that's the needle on the other side of your live stitches. So I've got my crochet hook with a slip knot ready to go with some smooth scrap yarn. And I'm just going to go ahead and provisionally cast 3 stitches on right here. So after you've got those 3 stitches on, you just want to single crochet 1 or 2 more chains just to kind of have those on there. Sorry, not even single crochet, just chain a few more chains and then cut your yarn. And then you are going to be ready to start working. The first thing that you want to do is with your wrong side facing and your attached yarn, purl across those 3 stitches. I think it's really important to show you that setup because I find some people get a little bit confused by that. And now that you've purled across those 3 stitches, you've kind of attached the end of your I-cord that you're going to be working right there. You're going to turn your work so that you're on the right side, and you want to use a double pointed needle because it's just much easier to do at this point. So you're using that size, the needle D, which is a bigger needle. You're going to knit 2, and then you're going to slip 1, and you're going to slip that knitwise, and then you're going to knit 1 and pass a slip stitch over. And then you're going to take those 3 stitches that you just worked and put them back onto the left-hand needle. And then you're going to knit 1, knit 2, you're going to slip 1 knitwise, knit 1, pass slip stitch over. And that is how you work an attached I-cord edging. What's happening here when you go to knit is your yarn is coming back behind your work, and it creates like a lovely little edge at the top of a shawl. This is sometimes I want to call it an edge finishing that I use often when I want to have something kind of neat and tidy that doesn't roll. So that is your attached I-cord edge. And I've got one more thing to show you. Let's do that. All right, last up is your lace bottom border. I use a different kind of I-cord edging in the lace bottom border. There's an I-cord edging on each edge of the border that is integrated into the lace border. And what I do with that edging is if I worked it and I didn't kind of elongate the stitches in it, it wouldn't block out well when you went to block the shawl. So I use a trick of a double wrap that gets dropped on the next row, and that makes it so that the edge doesn't kind of pull up tight but blocks out equally to the lace. So let me show you how to do that, and then also how to work this lace stitch. This is a lace stitch that I've seen worked just in like kind of one little faggoted edge in a Shetland shawl, but I decided to kind of use it all the way across and stack those stitches on top of each other. And I think it ends up being really geometric and modern and matches the rest of the stitches in a tween really beautifully. So I'm going to go ahead right here and I'm going to knit the first stitch. And the second stitch I'm going to knit, but I'm going to wrap my yarn twice around my needles. And now I'm going to jump into the lace. I'm going to knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2. And I'm going to continue doing that across. Knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2. Knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2. Knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2. And then finally, knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2. And when I get to the last 2 stitches, this first stitch, I'm going to knit wrapping the yarn twice, and then I'm going to knit the last stitch. And now on row 2, you're going to see it looks very familiar except for the first and last stitches. I'm going to bring my yarn to the front. I'm going to slip those 2 stitches, dropping the extra wrap, and what that does is kind of elongate that edge right there. And now I'm going to knit 2 together, yarn over, knit 2 across. And I'm going to do this until I get to those last 2 stitches. And I am going to bring my yarn to the front of my work and slip those last 2 stitches, dropping the extra wrap, elongating that I-cord edge. So that is the last big trick that I have to teach you for a tween. Gosh, I wonder if we should try to count all of the things that I covered in this one design. You've got some chart reading, you have placed beads that are worked in 2 different places in the pattern. You have this fun color work slip stitch pattern. We have that insanely good time graft that I really love to do. We've got an attached I-cord edging. We have yarn overs at the beginning of the traps, and perhaps I forgot something else. So I hope that you have a great time knitting a tween. Don't forget, we've got a Facebook group that you can ask questions in. We'll have a knit along in the Ravelry thread. You can ask questions below here. I keep track of everything. We are here to help you. No knitter left behind. I absolutely love doing club designs, and I'm thrilled that you chose to be a part of it in 2022 with me. Thank you.